There are 6 different possible locations for the next One Piece arc, something we should well and truly be talking about right here, right now, as Elbaf is primed to enter its climax, and we need to start considering how One Piece overall is going to end. Which brings us to quite possibly the most obvious choice for the next arc, which would be to finally visit the island of Laugh Tale, so that Luffy can claim the One Piece, become the Pirate King, and bring this story to an end. We are in the final saga after all. It makes sense that it would now be time to start actually wrapping things up, but this is not quite that simple. The next arc taking place on Laugh Tale is only really a possibility if we discover the 4th road poneglyph as part of the Elbaf arc, which isn't out of the question, and Copacabana is currently on the short list of theorized candidates to be the man marked by flames due to the flame-like scar on his face, and Elbaf may actually be the best possible location in the world to hide a road poneglyph, because very few pirates are arrogant enough to invade a land of giant warriors, especially if an Emperor of the Sea happens to be docked there at the same time. Just kid. I mean, there was that one guy, but most people aren't going to be kidding themselves into oblivion. But the issue with the road poneglyph being on Elbaf is that it's currently, I think, implied that the final road poneglyph is always in transit. The man marked by flames travels aboard this pitch black ship, much like Dragon ship, I should say, another on the short list of theorized candidates, and our last mystery cube is assumedly always traveling with him, and therefore is not somewhere stationary on Elbaf. What it comes down to is that if we do not find the final road poneglyph as part of Elbaf, then there will be at least one more arc before Laugh Tale. It might not be something as long as Egghead or Elbaf, but given our current chapter publishing rate of about 30 chapters a year, even something short ends up adding a lot of real-world time to what remains of One Piece. But to throw something unusual that really shouldn't be unusual out there, let's say that we are only main questing from here on out, no more distractions, and our challenge it is to find the man marked by flames sailing on that black ship. That could mean that the next arc may not take place on an island at all, but instead somewhere on the sea. That is something that shockingly we've never really seen in One Piece. The closest example we have is Baratie, but we've never been able to see a full-on showcase of pirate warfare in their native element. One of my absolute favorite moments of the Wano arc was the end of chapter 974, which gave us the iconic Luffy line, "When you're at sea, you fight against pirates." And I was so unbelievably hyped when I read that line, but once I'd finally calmed my farm, I realized that that is not at all true for One Piece, because pirates in this series tend to be incredibly landlocked. Most of the biggest pirating names in this world, the emperors, the warlords, etc., they function much less like pirates and more like kings with an extended navy. And I imagine that this is on purpose, because Oda likes to contrast these more traditional powers against Luffy by showing how trapped the big name pirates are within their territories, organizations, and responsibilities, whilst Luffy has none of that to deal with and has the freedom to do whatever he wants at any given moment. And that freedom is quite enviable. I remember as a young lad, that's sort of how the early internet used to feel, like an open adventure that is gradually being cracked down upon, restricted, and monitored, and that's why I use the sponsor of today's video, Proton VPN. Privacy is a fundamental human right, with the most amazing thing about Proton VPN being that it is based in Switzerland, meaning that my data is protected by the strict laws that Swiss citizens enjoy, Swissizens, if you will. And for a country that notoriously never takes sides, I think it's pretty impressive that we have managed to get them on our side, protecting our online privacy. Proton VPN is extremely easy and intuitive to use, and it essentially encrypts your internet traffic and protects it from prying eyes, as well as allowing you to unlock content typically subject to geo-blocking, like TV shows, movies, sports, and even news. And with 15,000 servers in 122 countries, Proton VPN ensures high-speed, reliable connections wherever you are, as well as routes traffic through hardened servers in Switzerland, Iceland, or Sweden before it leaves their network, adding that extra layer of privacy. But another brilliant factor is that Proton is a business that runs on subscriptions. That's extremely important because it means that there is no venture capital, there is no collecting and selling data. The only people they answer to is you and me. They answer to me. So you can and should check out Proton VPN by heading to protonvpn.com/groundline review, which currently has a Black Friday deal of 75% off for a 24-month plan, with this offer being available from October 27th to January 5th. So definitely give it a go, but for now it's back to you, me, Thanks, me. But look, we're not messing around anymore. We currently have a 4-way race to become the next Pirate King. And it's not just Luffy who knows about the man marked by flames. The Blackbeard pirates have directly mentioned him. The Red Hair pirates probably know what actually happened to the final road poneglyph, which Shanks has already seen before. And as for Buggy and Crossguild, look, they'll find out somehow because it is the most fun option. And what I think would be really cool, and I get that this is going to sound like pretty cringy fanfic, but what I think would be cool would be for all 4 emperors to converge on the man marked by flames at the same time, because they all need to get that one last poneglyph to get to Laugh Tale. And maybe that turns out to be a full-on 4-way pirate war on the sea, or perhaps something more civilized like a 4-way Davy Back fight with the key to Laugh Tale at stake, in addition to any other poneglyph rubbings that various crews may or may not need. I just want one arc in One Piece that feels classically piratey, something that takes place in some extremely dangerous patch of ocean somewhere in the New World. And various sectors of ocean have been named, like Ed Wharf, for example. This is the patch of water where Golden Lion Shiki faced off against the Roger Pirates, so we could still have a cool location-based name for a sea arc. But if Oda doesn't want to set an entire arc at sea, then he also has a ton of other options as well, including one very important island that often gets forgotten about. In chapter 820, a tall dog named Inuarashi took quite the lore dump that the responsible Straw Hats proceeded to scoop up and dispose of, like responsible dog owners, not in my area, no. And he stated, "If you are curious to see where this log pose leads you, you are free to follow it. There is a point where all 3 needles point you to the same location. Normally, it is when you reach the log's endpoints that you come to a realization about the mystery of the ancient writing on the poneglyphs, and the civilization that gave birth to them, and the existence of Raftel, the final unseen island." Inuarashi says Raftel because this is before the Laugh Tale reveal, which he wouldn't have known about because Inuarashi and Nekomamushi were not with the Roger Pirates when they named it. But what Inuarashi was referring to is a Lodestar Island, the final reachable island in the New World that in the last 800 years, as far as we know, only the Roger Pirates have been able to set foot on. So this island, for all intents and purposes, seems to be as hard to get to as Laugh Tale is, and that difficulty was likely the purpose of that location, as this island reveals the secret that there are 30 poneglyphs scattered throughout the world should you not have noticed them during your initial journey, and this is an integral location set up by the figures of the Void Century to ensure that the voices of the past would live on, and that the world government would not be able to reach it to obliterate them. Now, in theory, there is no practical need to visit Lodestar Islands that we're aware of, because we already know and have a rather large collection of poneglyphs, but this would still be a great and important location for an arc nonetheless. Firstly, because it is the final accessible point of the New World. There is an irresistible sense of challenge and adventure that I think would appeal to Luffy simply in trying to get there. Remembering that Luffy is not at all a practical captain. There was no real reason to risk his life sailing up the knock-up stream to Skypiea other than to experience being there. And I mentioned it before, but this is about the key principle of freedom. Lodestar Island is one of the most impossible locations in this world to access, and if Luffy can't get there, then is he really the most free man in the world? Setting foot on this island almost feels like a prerequisite for Luffy to go on to meet his definition of becoming the Pirate King. And it would also serve an important narrative purpose, which is to give the Straw Hats permission to go backwards. I bring this up in a lot of videos because I think it's a huge element of the massive success of One Piece, but the story operates on a principle of always moving forward to the next adventure, always moving on to the next island in the Grand Line. However, once you get to Lodestar, there is no more forward left to go. You have completed it, which again gives us permission to go backwards and complete a lot of plot points that have been set up in the past, like reviving the frozen giants on Punk Hazard or dealing with Charlie's prophecy on Fishman Island. And in terms of functionality, there may even be a poneglyph on Lodestar Island itself that Robin needs to add to her collection, and it's also a location that contains a surprising amount of relevance for Nami's dream of mapping the world. Most of the One Piece world, it's already mapped in some way, but this island is not. No one has ever mapped it because no one has been able to get there except for Roger, and I doubt they bothered. So Nami theoretically cannot achieve her dream without going here at some point. But the island could also be the setting of a showdown between assorted emperors, or Lodestar Island could be something that we only see in a Roger flashback. I hope that the latter is not the case, because a Roger flashback would probably mean that we only see one quick chapter of the island. And I know it's not Laugh Tale, it's not as important, but Lodestar is representative of what we've been working towards since the very beginning, which is constantly pushing forward in the grand line to find its endpoint, the point that Crocus told us to seek back in Reverse Mountain. So I do hope that the Straw Hats end up going here at some stage, but we do still have a lot of other options remaining as well. And the one that would excite me even more than Lodestar would be shooting off into space. If Luffy was ever told that space travel was possible, and that it was possible via balloons, then I would have a very hard time believing that he would not want to do it. And we have never had a better opportunity for a space journey than we do right here and now. We're already on Elbaf, the top point of which is practically the height of Sky Island, and we have Lilith's expertise to build us something to get there. But other than for the sake of fun, why is space in any way important? Good question. That would be because space, and specifically the ancient moon civilizations of One Piece, tell us a lot about how the world became what it is today. And it's quite likely that a lot of the grand technology of the ancient kingdom was created by these advanced Moonanites who fled their homes because they had consumed all of their natural resources. The story of the One Piece world does not entirely start on planet Blue Star itself. There is an extensive cosmic history on these moons that is criminally underexplored. And the importance of these moons is even highlighted in the Elbaf mural, where we can see at least 3 moons, and the rest of them are potentially there as well, but being covered up by the Harley text boxes. But here is what's most important. We've explored one of these moons during NL's cover story, but we don't have to go to that one. There are 6 other moons that we haven't explored at all, at least one of which is likely to be the home of the space pirates and could hold integral information at this stage in the story. There has never been a better time to go there because we are really on the cusp of heading into proper Void Century lore. But all of the stuff on the moons would tell us how the world got to that state to begin with. So we would know both what happened before the Void Century and what happened after, leaving that 100-year gap a true void until Oda finally decides to fill it in. There are a few problems with going to space though. The first is that even with all of the history available, it does seem like a huge narrative detour at the moment. Like, unless the road poneglyph is on one of the moons. And considering that Oda wasn't even originally going to Elbaf, asking for space, that might be tricky. It's also difficult to come up with the idea of who the antagonist would be in some sort of a space arc, as we are rapidly running out of villains to escalate into, to the point where we are now facing off against Imu on Elbaf, and it doesn't really get much higher than him. We've got our Blackbeards and our Sakazukis lurking for the endgame, but unless Oda ties a very major antagonist into it, I'm not sure if a space and or moon arc can happen. It's a lot more difficult than just say going to Lodestar Island, because it requires not only the Straw Hats having space travel, but also other factions being able to do it all of a sudden, or the difficulty of introducing an extraterrestrial antagonist and building them up to somehow be more threatening than the Imu we're facing right now. And it may be a setting best left for some sort of One Piece spin-off after the series ends, where whoever inherits the will of Luffy decides to become an astronaut and claim that he will one day be the most free person in the galaxy and or universe. Because you know that after One Piece ends, it's not going to end. I'm afraid the series makes far too much money, and it may not be Oda who continues it, but Shueisha or Toei, they are going to milk new content out of the teat of One Piece for the rest of, at the very least, of my life. To stay a bit more grounded though, there is always the potential of a Hachinosu arc coming after Elbaf as well. And Hachinosu, it does have several factors going for it, one of which is that it is the birthplace of modern piracy, and so it would almost feel like a rite of passage going through there. It's a piracy holy land in its own right, and I believe it's also fairly close to Elbaf, and there are a couple of people there that the Straw Hats they do care about. Garp was captured during the sword raid on Hachinosu, so that may hold some significance for Luffy, but in addition to him, Charlotte Pudding is currently being held there as well, which certainly holds significance for Sanji, and probably the rest of the Whole Cake Island team to some degree as well. And I've mentioned the Davy backfight possibility in this video already, but if such a thing was to happen, then this is the best venue for it. Hachinosu is where the Davy backfight began, and it would be phenomenal if for whatever reason, all of our emperors ended up converging on the Holy Land of piracy to engage in the most traditional of pirate contests. But what Hachinosu doesn't have going for it is that as an island, it's fairly well explored already. We spent a fair bit of time there with Sword as well as in this Rocks flashback, so Oda might decide that this island is done and dedicate time to drawing something brand new instead. Hachinosu does also have a poneglyph, those are pretty important, but Robin may or may not already have have it. It really does depend on whether or not Trafalgar Law was nice enough to share his findings with her, because he had already obtained that poneglyph during the Rocky Port incident. I don't know though, Hachinosu to me it doesn't feel like the right answer. I'd be thrilled if it was, it sounds fun. But as we speak, Blackbeard is preparing to set sail to an unknown location with the bulk of his forces, and wherever that is, he would probably take Garp and Pudding with him to keep them defended. So there's not a lot about Hachinosu that currently strikes me as a must-visit location for the Straw Hats. It would be a lot of fun just because of the history of the island itself, but I don't really know how much there is left to discover there. So it's not my top choice going forward, however the toppest of choices would end up taking us backwards, as we should not dismiss the Holy Land of Marijois being the setting of the next arc. And yes, this does somewhat break the rule of One Piece, which is that we don't go backwards, as the Holy Land is sitting all the way back at the halfway mark of the Grand Line above Fishman Island, but we could get to that mark possibly through another mark being the Mark of the Abyss. As far as we know, this mark can only travel people who share the mark, but Oda could make up anything to allow the Straw Hats to teleport to the Holy Land if need be. Narrative rules, they are flexible, which would be fun because it would get around the going backwards rule, and it could even be a natural escalation of Elbaf events, which are surprisingly world government centric, and I could see the Straw Hats setting their sights on the Holy Land if Imu is forced to retreat there with Gunko. Because as chill of a dude as Brook is, if Gunko does turn out to be his daughter as we suspect, then there is surely no way he's going to pull the Laboon excuse and ask Gunko to wait until he's completed his journey and made Luffy the Pirate King. And of course, someone else is already causing chaos on Marijois as we speak, which is why Shamrock was summoned back from Elbaf. So there's a lot of potential for some serious escalation here involving multiple factions. And Marijois could even end up being the Enies lobby to Elbaf's Water 7. It's not at all out of the question, although if we do end up liberating Gunko on Elbaf, then we would need a pretty big and major reason to go out of our way to hit up Marijois. Meanwhile, other suggestions have also been made. For whatever reason, I've noticed a true surge in comments from people claiming that Vera will be the next island, which is one of the first Grand Line islands we ever learned the name of. And if you do not recall, this information was dropped in chapter 96, which stated that a coup had just occurred in Vera, so hinting towards some Revolutionary Army activities there. And so if we have a Revolutionary Army based arc, might not be a bad choice. And also because Vera is not a one-off island, it also makes an appearance later in chapter 228 when Vera comes up again in Nolan's logbook, then described as being a lively town 400 years ago. And Vera could very well be in the New World, because we know that Nolan made it all the way to Dressrosa at the very least. Personally, I would say that I'm not really on board with the Vera choo-choo train. I think it would be fun to explore on a cover story or in an SBS because there is a lot of history with it, but I do think we have better options for an actual arc. And when I asked all of you what those better options would be, an island for the next arc, I got suggestions such as Sniper Island, Emerald City, Australia, Russia, Your Mom's House, and the Straw Hats' adventures on Epstein Island. And as unlikely as all of those and all of my suggestions may sound, that is what is very special about current One Piece, which is that we are in an unknown. Elbaf was really the last island we were waiting for before Laugh Tale, and what comes in between those two locations is a beautiful mystery, because not knowing is what makes this an adventure.